hope everyone's okay today. It's Emma from the University of ADHD podcast, and today I'm excited to be joined by a guest to talk about grief. I'm joined today by Gaynor Rosier, who's a fellow hypnotherapist. So, just to give a bit of background about Gaynor, after she got her psychology degree, she qualified in teaching and social work during the 70s and 80s. Gaynor trained as an NLP practitioner and hypnotherapist and continued her training with Marissa Peer to become a clinical hypnotherapist and rapid transformational therapy practitioner. Gaynor gains most joy transforming the lives of clients experiencing anxiety, phobias, fears, OCD, panic attacks, and grief. As a long serving volunteer bereavement counsellor with Cruise, Gaynor worked with clients struggling with complex grief. Through her personal experiences of family grief and running face to face bereavement groups with Mindset Vitality, the local charity that she founded, Gaynor has gone on to help lots of people through their journey with grief. So, hello, Gaynor, and welcome.
Hello. Hi, Emma. Thank you for having me on.
That's great. I find all this very interesting. Our audience are students with ADHD, and trauma is very much associated with ADHD. The nature of it causes negative life experiences, and people with ADHD are more likely to develop PTSD and complex PTSD from their life experiences. So
Mm.
everybody is affected by grief, but people with ADHD can tend to feel this more intensely and struggle with regulating their emotions around it. Now,
Mm.
I work with trauma quite a lot, but I'm keen to hear more about grief, so it's really good to have you on the show.
Okay.
So to start off with, how would you define grief?
Okay. Well, it's a natural experience that we all have to face at some time or another.
Mhm,
It's what follows from the mourning, which is, you have the funeral and the sort of public display. That's classed as the mourning. But what you feel personally and what continues after the funeral, that's what we call grief.
mhm,
So it's a very personal journey. We call it a grief journey,
mhm,
because every death is different, the circumstances, every relationship is different, and people's personalities and previous experiences are different. And then you've got added things like ADHD that makes a difference.
mhm,
So it's a very unique journey for each person, but there are certain symptoms that we can see, which are physical, mental, and emotional and
mhm,
behavioral, that you can spot, and talking to people how they cope, is going to be different again for each individual. But the overall experience, outwardly, there are a lot of things that we can recognize that people have in common,
yeah,
which is why it's good to bring people together, because it normalizes people's experience and people's feelings. So that's why it's really helpful, to bring people together into groups.
yeah, definitely. And I've
Mm.
heard from a couple of people that, like clients that I've seen that have said, I don't think I'm grieving in the right way. Would you say there's a right way or a wrong way with grief?
No, no, because it's so individual. But what I will say is the key thing is not to suppress your emotions.
Mhm,
That's really, really important. So I say that applies to everyone.
mhm,
But how much emotion you have and how you cope with that is going to be different for everyone.
mhm,
But there are strategies and tools and techniques that can help people to cope and to release and manage their emotions.
mhm. Okay. So that's really good because I think a lot of the time when people talk to their friends and family, maybe the people around them just don't know what to say. Is that something that you've come across quite a lot?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think every
Mm,
person who's grieving will say that, that some people will cross the road to avoid them because they don't
mm,
know what to say, and it's very hurtful.
yeah.
I mean, there is information out there if you Google it, but
Hmm.
or you look on the cruise website, or my website or whatever, there is information, but I think because death is still such a taboo subject,
Yeah.
people don't think about it until it hits them in the face and they got to
Mhm.
deal with it themselves. So they don't sort of learn how to respond to other people who are grieving. In fact, because it's like a bit of a superstitious thing that, oh, if you talk about death, you're sort of inviting it into your family.
Yeah.
So people will avoid it like the plague. So they don't bother to learn how to respond to people who are grieving either,
Yeah.
apart from professionals, that
Mhm.
that obviously do.
Yeah.
So,
So, are there different types of grief? If so, what kind of grief have you worked with?
right. Well, there's what we would call, I suppose, normal grief,
Mhm.
and then there's complex grief.
Right.
So in crews, because I've been there a long time and I supervise other volunteers and things, I work with the complex cases,
Mhm.
which are complex because either the death was very traumatic, maybe like a murder, suicide,
Mhm.
a severe accident or something that makes it harder for the person who's grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah, so or also we talk about complicated grief. They're sort of interchangeable, really. But
Mhm.
if the grief goes on a long time, now in America, they got this DSM thing, and they're on 5 at the moment, which
Mhm.
is the classifying symptoms
Yeah.
into disorders. And they've recently put grief on that,
Right. Okay.
in that if somebody's still grieving after 6 months to a year
Mhm.
and they have certain things that they tick off,
Mhm.
where they're actually not facing the grief at all, not just their feelings, but they're avoiding it as if it didn't happen. They're
Yeah.
not really accepting reality. So they might take down all the photos because they don't want reminders, and you know, they go to great lengths to just avoid the whole subject,
Mhm.
which is not healthy because you're not processing your emotions. So, that's been classified now as disorder. But
Right.
then grief is a natural thing.
Mhm.
So, I'm glad we haven't got that system here,
Yeah.
because I think we still need to work with people. Cruise works with people, however long ago the death was. And when I'm doing shifts on their helpline, some people will say, "Oh, my mother died when I was a child." And then my father died when I was a teenager. And they think they coped at the time, but now my child has died, or my spouse, someone really close,
Mhm.
and it's hit me for 6. Well, that's because they didn't deal with those previous emotions because they didn't have any help and they were
Yeah.
too young and whatever. So, things like that, previous bereavements, and also our attachments as a child are very
Mhm.
important as well in
Yeah.
how people respond to grief. So there's a lot to it,
Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah, I've dealt with complex and complicated grief, and there are people now in the mindset vitality groups, where their loved one died more than 2 years ago,
Mhm.
and they're not. I wouldn't class them as having a disorder.
Yeah.
If it's your loved one you've been with all your life, well, practically, you're not going to just get over it in a few months. You're still going to miss them, but as long as you're functioning and getting on with life and you're not denying the reality, that's fine, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
think.
you can't really put time scales on it, and people worry
Yeah.
about these time scales. It just makes
Mm.
it harder.
Yeah, and it's a strange concept of actually putting a timescale on it because everyone's different, relationships are different, and as you say, if it's somebody that you've like been like very close to for all of your life, and suddenly they're gone, it's not going to be easy to get, as you say, get over it.
Yeah.
Um, mm,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we know we don't talk about getting over it. We
Mm,
say you have to learn to live with it.
yeah.
And there are a couple of models of grief that we use. And one, I don't know if you've seen like a picture of it, where your grief is a certain size
Mhm.
and it's inside a jar. It's like a ball inside a jar or a box.
Yeah.
I like the box analogy
Mhm.
because initially the box is quite small, and if it's rattled, the ball's going to bounce about inside and cause you pain.
Yeah.
But as you process your emotions, then the box gets bigger. But the
Right.
ball is still the same size. You've still got that grief, but
Mhm.
because the box is bigger, it's not bouncing around so much. It's not
Yeah.
getting triggered so often. And
Right.
then the next stage is an even bigger box, you know? So the
Yeah.
grief is always going to be there, but
Mm.
it's not having such an impact as
Yeah.
you do the work. It's not just time that heals, you have to do the work of
Yeah.
processing grief. And of course, a lot of people think, well, what does that mean? How do I do that? Which is
Mm.
what I help people with. Then there's another model, which is called the dual process model.
Mm.
And that says that we oscillate between doing the grief work and doing other things to do with getting on with life.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then that we oscillate back and forth. And it's okay to have some distraction as long as you're not using that to avoid your grief. It's okay to do other things. It doesn't mean you're forgetting your loved one.
Yeah.
And that it's this is the way we can heal by this oscillation back and forth.
Yeah.
So I quite like that model as well.
Yeah. They're both really good models. I definitely like that box analogy. That's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause I mean, I deal with a lot of people with anxiety, and I always put it as you can't carry that rock around with you all the time. You need to put it down. And
Mm.
it doesn't mean that the rock's going away. It just means that you're having that break to help you to be able to pick it up again.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
Yeah. And, things like self-compassion are really
Mhm.
important. And think this is why I've chosen to work with women in the group.
Mhm.
My grief relief thing, not the
Mhm.
charity. Because what I find is women grieve more.
Mm.
On the helpline, I do have calls from men,
Mhm.
but it's more women, say like, I don't know, two-thirds women and a third men, or
Mm.
even less men, maybe. Because I think men tend to be better at compartmentalizing things. So
Mm.
they'll push it somewhere to the back of their mind, but it's not good because they're not actually dealing with it.
Mm.
But there are exceptions. I had a chap recently who was sobbing when I first answered the phone to him. And he was saying that he feels like a failure and he's not a real man because he's grieving so badly.
Yeah.
Whereas his wife is getting on with things and getting on with work, and they had a stillborn child.
Right.
So, and you expect the woman to find it harder than the man, really, because she's carried the pregnancy and everything. But in this
Yeah.
case, it's the man who was feeling it worse. So, obviously, I talked to him about, real men do have feelings and they're not afraid to show them, and that just covering them up doesn't help.
Yeah.
And it's good to cry. It's actually therapeutic
Mhm.
because it releases oxytocin and
Yeah.
endorphins, our natural painkillers.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to cry. So, we had a good conversation, and by the end, he'd learned enough to feel okay about what he was going through.
Yeah.
So, I use a lot of psychoeducation and a lot of mindset as well to help people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And
Okay.
coming back to ADHD, we've got a
Yeah.
lady in one of the face-to-face groups
Mhm.
who has ADHD, and her daughter-in-law died of cancer not
Right.
so long ago. And she's really struggling with that because I think
Mm.
she was, quite close to her daughter-in-law. She'd been in the family a long time and she got quite a young child. Um, so there was that, but also this lady her mother died when she was in her early teens. And of course,
Right.
then she wouldn't have known how to cope with it really. So I think it's triggering that and her attachment issues as well.
Yeah.
And when we do exercises in the group, if it's something where, like a guided meditation or something like that, she says she can't visualize at all.
Mhm.
So I say, well, just imagine you are, or whatever. And I said, how do you find your way home if you can't visualize? Because somehow we must have a map in our head to
Yeah.
find our way from place to place. But often people with ADHD think they can't visualize
Mm.
because maybe they don't see clear pictures, but it's something you can train your brain to do better. Or,
Mhm.
just pretend, just go along with it and you still get the benefit.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So you've given quite a lot of really good advice. Is there anything else you could add to any of our listeners who are experiencing grief at the moment?
yeah, well, I mentioned self-care, and that's really important, and self-compassion.
Mhm.
And again, I find women are not very good at that because they prioritize everyone else, don't they?
Yeah.
And we feel guilty if we're doing something for ourselves. So we have to get over that. And, on the airplane, they said put your own mask on first, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you do have to really do that and focus on it. And, you need to train yourself to do that. So in the grief relief toolkit, I do a lot around that.
Mhm.
And in the face-to-face group, I do a lot of exploring our feelings and changing our language because that
Mm.
is how we program our brains. So sometimes you need to change from saying, I am sad, to saying, I'm feeling sad today.
Yeah.
Because emotions come and go, they're not permanent, and we need them to move at their energy in motion. They need to move through our bodies as
Yeah.
well, through somatic work. And that would probably be better for people with ADHD to do that somatic work
Yeah.
rather than trying to solve it up in the brain because there's no solution to grief. The
Mm.
person's not going to come back, are they? So
Yeah.
your brain is trying to solve it, but it never can. So you've got to look at your emotions and your body,
Mm.
really.
Okay. So you mentioned the grief relief toolkit. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, yes. So it's an 8-week course that I've put together for women, as I say, sort of mature women then, who more likely to have experienced some grief. And it's affecting their work, or they're afraid it will affect their work because they're sort of career women. Because you've got the thing called grief brain, which is
Mhm.
where you've got like brain fog. And that's because you're sort of splitting your resources between trying to push the grief down when you're at work and trying to
Mm.
concentrate on your work.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's an online group program so that people have that community and they can sort of share their journal and things if they want to, and sort of keep each other accountable. So they have modules to work through each week, which they can do more or less at their own pace. But then we
Mhm.
have weekly live sessions as well, where I help them with implementation and also do things like guided meditations and teaching some of the more complicated techniques and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So yeah, so I want to get a cohort of people to start at the same time. I
Mhm.
might eventually move to Evergreen, but I'm not quite sure how I would do that yet. So,
Yeah.
so I'm hoping to start fairly soon when I have enough people.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. Brilliant. That sounds like it could be really helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, because people will try a lot of different tools and techniques, and then they will choose what works for them
Mhm.
and have it in their mental toolkit. And they'll have lots of information and resources they can look back on, and they can still look at the modules, in a year's time if they want to.
Mhm.
So, it's a tool that's there indefinitely for people, but they do have to do the work. It's no good if you don't implement it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, it's been really brilliant to have you on the show today, Gaynor, and I'm going to pop a link to Gaynor's website. So if you're interested in joining the Grief Relief Toolkit program, then just pop down into the description in the show notes and you'll be able to find that link there. So thank you very much for coming on the show today.
You're welcome. It's been excellent. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, bye everyone, and I'll see you in the next episode, which will be released tomorrow.